Hey guys, this is a video response for the discussion on peaking for training group. And it's easier for me to do it on video. So I'll put it up on the channel, then stick it in training group. Anyway, let me get to the question. So before nationals or the peak, what should change in training? So in the video, I described how you want your skills and motivation, everything to kind of coalesce and peak right before your goal match. Like everything comes together in that moment. Uh, what should change in training? So you're going to get to a point, a few weeks, a month, whatever, before your big goal match, where you're like, okay, you just have to accept I'm not going to improve from here. Like this is as good as I'm going to be. Like in terms of raw skills before this match, now I need to focus on getting my head in the right place. That's how I look at it. Now at that point, it's going to change. If you've been shooting for a few years and you have kind of a plateau and you're not, improving a bunch with training, it's like a slow process. Then this is very true for you. If you've been shooting for 3 months, then it's not really true that you're not going to improve in the month before your big match. But for the guys that are, like make a career out of shooting matches, you get to a point pretty quickly where it's like you're not going to be noticeably better next month than you are this month. Anyway, so when you get to that point, what changes in your training is you just go out and shoot for consistency. You do what you know how to do and you get your head right. And that can be done a lot of different ways. So the type of stages you expect for this match, the type of challenges you expect to encounter, you can just go shoot them. And like for me, the idea is to just be comfortable with whatever that is. If you know you have to shoot weak-handed, then practice weak-handed shooting, make it super tough so you're not going to be uncomfortable with it in the match and have your emotions get the best of you. So that's the idea with that shift in training. It's not about getting better, it's about getting comfortable effectively. Would your dry fire factor change during the season, dry fire times or session compared to range training or round count? Yeah, you cycle your dry fire the same way. Sometimes a lot, sometimes a little, sometimes a lot of live, a lot of dry, other times rest, and so on. And you try to schedule heavy dry fire for when you'll have heavy dry fire to do. So here's a good example. Like let's say early on in the season, you've got a class and you're going to burn up a lot of your ammo budget and your money on a class. Okay, fine. You take the class and then you're like, I'm going to dry fire hard on all those concepts for like 2 weeks and then go back to the range for more training. Right? So if you schedule it that way, you'll likely be very engaged with your dry fire during that 2 week time period that you've scheduled it. And I would try to schedule everything intelligently in that way, best I can. How do you change from off season to preseason, main or peak season? What do you recommend to competitors not as natural, gifted with talent? Not everyone can make jam with 5,000 rounds. I would say not everyone can make jam with 5,000 rounds, but a lot of people can. I'll talk about that more in a second. How do you change from off season to preseason, main or peak season? You just do. You just change, right? When you get to the off season, like your big match is done and you've scheduled some rest, you just do it. Just take the rest. When it's time to fire back up your training, like I would say maybe in preseason, the one change I'd make is swell your round count at the beginning of preseason if you can, just to get a lot of exposure. And then you have a lot of specific, training goals. You have the preseasons where you're kind of the most free, I would say, to experiment and change things. During the main season, it's about balancing matches with training and not taking off in my head it's don't do too many matches. Like make sure you're well prepared and well rested and psychologically good for the matches you choose to go to. um, and then for the peak season, it's like clear out the rest of your calendar because it's going to be centered on your goal matches. At what point in the season of a competitor should major classes be scheduled if they're not a regular thing, as classes can take a large amount of resources from the yearly budget? The beginning is what everybody wants. Um, that's good for obvious reasons. The end of the year is fine. It's like think you shot the whole season and you got to a certain point, you did how you did. Then you go do a class at the end of the season when all that is kind of fresh in your brain. That's fine too. Mid-season stuff is a lot of times people just taking what's available. If you can do it, like I don't know, I would do it at the beginning or end of the season. Personally, I wouldn't have a big preference there. Just like whatever's available for me. I've got 2 classes scheduled so far this year, one in January and one in March that I'm taking, not teaching. Um, do you think classes with 2,000 rounds a day are worth taking part in when concentration is most likely to fall off during the day? 2,000 rounds a day is a lot. In my experience, very few people can shoot that much without losing concentration. And we totally could shoot that much. Like I've done classes where we shoot that much. Absolutely. But in most cases, that's with guys who are like they're being paid to train type of a thing. And yep, concentration definitely falls off. You just have to decide if that's worth it to you. A lot of dudes think like the more shooting, the better in classes. I'm somewhere in the middle. I think what I've seen best results in is guys shoot like actually shooting 5 or 6 hours. So like an hour lunch break in there. So maybe like a 7 or 8 hour day. Um, After that point, most guys start falling off, whether they want to or not. They're going to start falling off. If yeah, especially if they don't shoot a lot. So um, you're definitely wasting some ammo. If you're shooting 2,000 rounds a day in a class, like you could be more efficient with the ammo, but maybe the ammo doesn't mean that much to you and you don't care. Would you recommend a certain number of round count per training session as a minimum? Um, no, I mean, you can, it depends on what you're doing. If you're shooting at 50 yards, practicing 150 rounds is going to be a lot. If you're walking down a lot and pacing a lot and um, being super accountable for what you're doing and thinking about it, like it just takes more time to burn up that ammo. 250 rounds is a good general number to work with, though, like for most stuff you're doing with a handgun. Would you recommend to spread out the available ammunition to as many sessions as possible or keep the round count high, like in 1 to 2 sessions per week? Um, Doing a little bit on a lot of different days is going to have the most benefit, but that's just if you're looking at the training in a vacuum. You've got to consider your time for travel to and from the range and, the rest of your life. But my preference is to break it in as many sessions as you can. Um, it's like if you can, for example, spread 500 rounds into 3 to 4 sessions weekly, or just shoot 500 rounds in 1 or 2 sessions. Well, I would do 500 rounds. I would probably do in three sessions if I was. Yeah, I would do 3 sessions and work in a lot of dry fire at the range. That'd be fine. Next question from a guy. I said I'd talk about this. I'd be curious to know if Ben thinks GM in 5,000 rounds is more generally doable or very unique, and if he thinks he could do it in the same number of rounds starting today. Um, I don't think it's crazy. I think like if you have hand-eye coordination and you're willing to practice and you're like the right place in the age physical ability place. So it's like I'm not saying everybody could do this, but if you're like young and healthy and motivated and all that stuff, yeah, you could still do it in 5,000 rounds. I think the tools are there for dry fire. Um, it was mostly dry fire anyway. It's not like it was I only shot 5,000 rounds and made GM. It was I did a shitload of dry fire and shot 5,000 rounds in a very specific way and made GM. Could you still do that? I think yes, and I think in some respects it'd be easier. Um, like a lot of guys have an easy time just picking up shooting with a carry optics gun, uh, as opposed to starting with iron sights. Like maybe they really take to the red dot. Guns are easier to shoot now, as far as like lighter triggers, heavier guns, less recoil. It's easy in that way. It's harder in the sense that the high hit factors have gone up. Um, but if they can kind of play the game the right way, yeah, people could make GM with very few rounds these days. I sure do think so. So okay, any more questions? You can just put them down below, and that's for the training group guys. And I'll cross post this to YouTube.